Greetings. My name is Abdullah, and I'm your English teacher from New York City. I want to welcome you to my channel, where my purpose for this channel is to help advanced speakers of English move to a higher level. That is the level of native or near native in their language. Likewise, another purpose of this channel is with accent reduction, helping those, inshallah, speak English as if it were their first language. Maybe you are very comfortable with your level of language, but you are not as confident with your accent. Then this is the perfect channel for you. Mostly I use newspapers from the UK and the US, as I feel that newspapers from the UK and the US are best for improving vocabulary, better than movies. After saying that, let's get started. Today's article comes to us from the UK, metro.co.uk. And the title, the headline of today's article is Third Annual Worm Charming Championships Sees Winners Wiggle to Victory. And this is by Katie Boyden. We've all heard of snake charmers playing woodwind instruments to lure reptiles out of baskets. But how about charming worms out of the ground? The third annual Foul-Mouthed Worm Charming Championships was held in Cornwall on Sunday, which saw hundreds of worms enticed up to the surface. The skill is also known as worm grunting or worm fiddling. As a profession, it's now very rare, with the technique passed down through the generations, Cornwall Live reports. In nature, worms come to the surface when they can feel the vibrations of raindrops hitting the ground. Birds imitate this by pecking at the ground or stamping their feet. But humans have a variety of methods, including playing instruments, banging garden forks, dancing vigorously, or by simply asking very politely for the worms to surface. This year, competitors managed to charm 260 worms out of the ground, a massive increase on last year, which was held during a heat wave and only saw one solitary worm reach the surface. Teams are given a 2-meter square plot of grass to charm worms out within 30 minutes without digging or using mechanical tools. Some techniques used during this year's competition include praying to the worm gods, La ilaha illallah, writing a love letter to the worms, playing the didgeridoo, and blowing into vuvuzelas, which is a horn from Brazil. As we see here in the picture, surely this would have woken worms up miles below the surface. The next picture. More than 100 teams took part. And finally, there were many prayers to the worm gods. Shirk, I have to tell you, is never funny or entertaining. Never to be played with, never to be joked with, ever. Worms have feelings too, as we see here in the picture. Titled, Charm, Don't Harm. The event, which received Arts Council and feast funding this year, proved a major attraction with worm portraits, worm tattoos, merchandise on offer, and a brass band entertaining crowds. Some people got tattoos of worms on their bodies. This year's winning team charmed 20 worms in half an hour, but they're far behind the current world record. That achievement was set by 10-year-old Sophie Smith in 2009, who charmed 567 worms during Britain's World Worm Charming Championship. Here we have some more photographs from the event. Are worms attracted to bright pink cowboy hats? One of the 260 worms charmed to the surface. The motto of this year's event was Charm, Don't Harm, with organizers reminding participants that worms are living creatures and they shouldn't be pulled out of the ground or otherwise injured. And while the day certainly seemed fun, if chaotic for humans, I can only assume the worms are already bracing themselves for next year's event. Interesting article. And now, inshallah, let's take the time to go through the article again, paying attention to the words that I highlighted before this recording. And these words are essential for helping us to understand better this vocabulary. Inshallah, let's get started. In order to improve our understanding, to deepen our understanding of this article about a worm charming championship, we have to understand key vocabulary. And as I mentioned before, those words are highlighted in another color. In this video, it's pink. So let's get started. Our first word is actually in the headline, and that word is wiggle. Wiggle means to move back and forth. Back and forth, F-O-R-T-H, in an irregular manner or in an irregular way. So, wiggling is different than shaking. So, for example, if you were to shake a can of soda, for example, usually that is back and forth or up and down. Wiggling happens randomly. So think about Jello, for example, Jello gelatin. When Jello gelatin moves, it wiggles. A great word to add to your vocabulary. Next, we have lure, L-U-R-E. Lure means to attract, A-T-T-R-A-C-T, or entice, E-N-T-I-C-E. So, luring simply means, and another way to put it, means to tempt. So, for example, customers were lured to the store by the discounts that were being offered or the sales that were being offered, meaning that they were attracted or enticed to come and make purchases. So let's look at our sentences. We've all heard of snake charmers playing woodwind instruments to lure reptiles out of baskets. So again, to attract reptiles out of baskets. In this situation, the author means snakes. Our next word is imitate. Our next word, imitate, is a great word. We use the word imitate to mean to copy someone or some things way of speaking, moving, behaving, etc. So, for example, a child will imitate the way the mother or the father walks or talks or speaks like this. Another example of imitation is I ask you to imitate the way that I read. I ask you to imitate my accent. If we look at our sentence, it says birds imitate this by pecking at the ground or stamping their feet. If you remember from above, we're talking about the sound that rain makes when it hits the ground. The pattern that worms hear entices them to the surface of the ground to make it easier for the birds to get them. Our next word is solitary. Solitary is a word that is used to stress only one of something. Only one, O-N-E, of something. So, for example, when the man went shopping, he could not find a solitary jar of peanut butter, for example, meaning not even one. So if we look at our sentence, it says this year, competitors managed to charm 260 worms out of the ground, a massive increase on last year, which was held during a heat wave and only saw one solitary worm. So the author did not say one worm, they said one solitary worm. Again, solitary here is stressing one. Great. These are great words. And again, as we see here, people here, this person has this large musical instrument. I guess he thinks that this is enticing the worms to the surface. Here we have another individual. And here, subhanAllah, people praying to the worms. They think this is funny. Wallahu wal-musta'an. Finally, we have the word proved. Proved here means simply to show or to demonstrate. Give me a second here. There we go. So, let me try to move this over here. Nice. So, the event, our sentence, which received Arts Council and feast funding this year, proved a major attraction, meaning it showed itself to be a major attraction. It demonstrated itself to be a major attraction. So much so that people were there selling worm portraits, or people there were offering worm tattoos. I don't know, somebody would want a worm tattoo or any tattoo for that matter. Next, people were offering merchandise, meaning selling t-shirts or, all the rest of it. And even a musical band, a brass band, there to entertain the crowds. Next, we have the word brace, or bracing in this situation. Bracing means to prepare oneself. Bracing means to prepare oneself for something difficult or unpleasant. S-A-N-T. Again, bracing or to brace means to prepare oneself for something that is difficult or unpleasant. So, for example, you know that the coming winter, inshallah, will be very difficult. It will be extremely cold. So you brace yourself. You may buy extra blankets. You might buy extra clothing. You make sure that you have fuel for heating. as we have here in our sentence. And while the day certainly seemed fun, if chaotic for humans, I can only assume the worms are already bracing themselves, meaning preparing themselves for the next coming year, because it will be difficult and stressful for the worms, according to this article. Listen, I think this was a very interesting article, and this is why I wanted to share it with you. At the end, I remind you about your homework. Number one, reread the article, not once, just with me, by yourself. Turn the sound off, inshallah. Turn the sound off and read the words as I have read them to you. Practice your pronunciation and also practice your accent. Next, write a sentence to me using one of the words here in the vocabulary. So, such as wiggle, such as lure, such as brace, such as solitary, as you like. If you write to me, inshallah, I will write to you. And in the end, I wish everybody the best in this life and the next. Fi aman ar-Rahman.